Good evening, community. Tonight I want to share my story with all of you. My name is Gabriela Serrano and I am from the state of Mexico, where I currently reside. The anecdote I'm about to tell you occurred right here in the collective microbus or truck, as you may call it depending on where you're listening from. I remember that back then, I worked as a housemaid, and I would take the microbus from my humble neighborhood all the way to the affluent area, including all the bus stops along the way, which took about an hour each morning. In the evening when I returned, it took roughly 40 minutes because I would head back late and there was less traffic. On one of those nights I left a bit later than my usual quitting time because there had been a party at the house where I worked, celebrating my employer's child's birthday, and they paid me extra to help clean up the mess that was left behind. I remember that on that occasion, I nearly missed the microbus. When I arrived at the stop, the last bus of the night was just pulling up, and fortunately, I managed to get on. I was very tired as the day had been particularly exhausting because of the party. I was very sleepy, but tried my best not to fall asleep, as those of us from here know that it's not a good idea for a woman to fall asleep while traveling alone on public transport. There's a lot of crime. However, I felt my eyes closing, something I couldn't control. A few minutes after I had closed my eyes and when I opened them again, I noticed that it was just me and another man left on the bus, sitting right at the front. The bus was otherwise empty. After that, my eyes started to close again due to overwhelming tiredness which I couldn't fend off. Suddenly, I felt someone sit next to me. I didn't open my eyes. I just moved my legs more towards the corner to not obstruct the person sitting by me, but I continued with my eyes closed, almost falling asleep. During this time, I could feel someone brushing against my arm. I knew there was someone sitting next to me. Of that I had no doubt. Although within my fatigue and drowsiness, I didn't think about why they had sat next to me if the bus was empty. Eventually, the bus stopped. It was my stop, the last one. I was almost completely asleep when someone shook my shoulder. It was the bus driver waking me up. "Ma'am, you need to get off the bus now," he said while I opened my eyes and looked around a bit confused. I turned and noticed that there were no other passengers. I thanked the driver for waking me up and gathered my things to get off the bus. Just then, I heard him ask, "Didn't a child come with you?" I replied that no, I was traveling alone and that I didn't have small children. The driver looked all around, seeming quite confused, and then he mentioned that he swore he had seen through the mirror a child between 6 and 8 years old sitting next to me, leaning on my arm, and he hadn't made any stops after seeing the child until he woke me up, but no one got off the bus. I remembered what I felt while coming in and out of sleep, as if someone was leaning on my arm and touching it. I knew someone was by my side, but I never found out who it was. In any case, I reiterated to the man that I was traveling alone, and afterward, he suggested that maybe he had seen it wrong, but I felt he just said that to make me feel at ease. It was obvious he was sure of what he had seen. I got off the bus, the driver closed the doors, and I waited for it to leave before crossing the street. But when it drove off, I managed to see through one of the windows at the back of the bus, a child's head and eyes looking at me. It was barely visible as the bus lights were off, but I saw how that little silhouette waved goodbye with its hand. I ran across the street to finally get home, feeling very scared as the streets were already deserted and dark, and I couldn't stop thinking about that child from the bus. I felt like it was following me. I don't know, but it left me with this strange feeling. After that, I never stayed late at work again, and the only time I had to, I opted for a taxi instead because that fear stayed with me for life. I didn't want that child to appear again because I knew it was no longer alive. It was the ghost of a child. Tonight I would like to share publicly for the first time this paranormal experience I had, which if someone else had told me, I might not have believed it, because it's truly astounding when you personally encounter something paranormal, that simply has no explanation. First off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ricardo, and I am originally from Guadalajara, Jalisco, where this event took place about 8 years ago when it happened to me. At that time, I was still attending university in the evenings and wouldn't get out until 9 p.m. Sometimes a classmate would give me a ride or drop me off near my home, but there were other times when we had different classes and schedules, so I had to take the microbus back home. One night I found myself taking this form of transport back home. It was raining, and I didn't have an umbrella, so I arrived at the station almost completely soaked. I remember being very cold due to the wetness and really wanted the microbus to arrive quickly because I was feeling very uncomfortable. Besides that, there were only about 3 other people waiting for the bus. The place felt very lonely, and I did not feel at ease at all. Among us was an elderly lady who was just a few steps away from me. She had a large scarf wrapped around her head, wore a long skirt down to her ankles, and had a significant humpback. I felt sorry for her because it was starting to get even colder with the rain. When the microbus finally arrived, we all started boarding, but this lady just stood there, not moving forward to get on as well, which I found very strange. Once everyone was aboard, the driver accelerated, and that lady stayed at the station just watching. I went to sit down and just looked out the window. The city was quite calm by then, but the rain didn't stop, and I thought about calling my dad to pick me up right at the stop since I still had a few blocks to walk to my house and, as I mentioned, I had no umbrella. As we reached the next station, where many people began to disembark and a few boarded, I saw something that made me edge forward in my seat, trying to focus and see if what my eyes were seeing was real because, among the crowd, there was that same old woman standing a few meters from the microbus while watching it intently. I didn't understand how she could have gotten there before us. It was impossible. So, I couldn't take my eyes off her until the bus started moving again. She just stayed there, watching as we left. It seemed very strange because I was sure it was the same woman. Of that, I had no doubt. This time, I was more alert for when we reached the next station. I wanted to be ready to see if that lady would be there again, and I was not mistaken. At the next stop, the same woman was standing in the same position, watching the microbus without blinking or looking away. Once again, the woman did not board, and the microbus was emptying more and more, and I began to feel scared. So, I didn't hesitate to stand up and ask the driver if he knew anything about that woman. The driver could see her too, and I'm sure some of the other passengers also noticed her if they weren't distracted. The driver told me not to look at her and not to pay her any attention because she was no longer alive. A colleague of his had run her over after she had stepped out in front, but that had been several months ago. However, every Monday the drivers of this transport saw her because she had lost her life on a Monday, and that day was Monday. It was shocking for me to hear this. I didn't know how to take it. I wasn't sure if the driver was just messing with me to have a good time scaring me or if it really had happened, but there was no logical way for that lady to be at each station we arrived at. It simply made no sense. The next stop was finally mine, and with everything about the lady I had forgotten to call my dad to pick me up at the station. So, when I called him, he told me to wait a bit because he had just gotten into the shower. Minutes later, I reached my stop. But before getting off, I checked to make sure that woman was not there. And surprisingly, she wasn't. More people got off with me, but gradually, they all went their separate ways until the place was completely empty again. The rain and thunder were intense, no cars were passing by, and I was alone with a chilling sensation. I turned around to see if the woman would suddenly appear there. I felt completely paranoid. I tried calling my dad again, but he didn't answer. I assumed he was still in the shower and couldn't answer the phone, but I was getting desperate and felt an irrational fear. So, despite the storm, I decided to walk home. I called my dad to tell him not to come for me as I crossed the street while dialing his number, but when he answered, He told me he was on the other side of the street and urged me to hurry because he was badly parked with his hazard lights on. But when I turned to see where he was, I saw that woman again, standing right where I had been a few seconds earlier, waiting for my dad. This time, she was looking directly at me. The feeling of terror that ran through my body is indescribable. I couldn't move. My dad was calling me from the phone, but I couldn't answer because he was on the other side of the street, staring at me face to face with that woman. My dad waited because some cars were honking at him. He moved forward, and I responded to the phone, and he told me, somewhat annoyed, that he would turn around, and then he hung up. I didn't manage to tell him that I would rather meet him in the next block because I didn't want to stay in sight with that eerie woman. Then, when I turned my gaze forward, a microbus was arriving, and when it left, the woman was no longer there. Finally, my dad arrived again, and this time I ran to get into the car. I was all soaked, but I no longer felt the cold because my mind was more focused on the fear I had and trying to find a reason for the situation, but I could never do it. I remember that every Monday, if I didn't have anything that would give me a ride, I preferred to take another mode of transport, even if it was more expensive, to avoid passing by the stops of that public transport because I was very frightened. I never dared to tell this to my family or friends because I feared they wouldn't believe me and would even mock me. Only a few years later did I tell my parents, after I had graduated from university. And now, I have finally gathered the courage to share it with a large audience like this one, and I hope that at least what I lived through has served to entertain you for a while. Thank you for your time. Have a good evening, everyone. Good evening, community. I want to share a very strange experience that happened to a friend and me, along with several other people who were on the bus with us. My name is Claudio Vela, and to set the scene, I'll start by mentioning that this occurred a few years ago in Baja California. I lived in a village near a large city in that state. I am currently living in the United States, but at that time, I was working with my friend at an automotive company in the city. Therefore, we had to travel back and forth on public transportation. Every day, it was a shuttle that went back and forth from my village to the city, and vice versa. Back then, I was just 18 years old, and my sole goal was to take care of my mom. Now I will begin to recount that strange, otherworldly event that I experienced one of those many nights when we were coming back to our village on the bus. It was around 10 p.m. It was the last bus of the night, and there were just 5 of us in it, including my friend, myself, and the driver. We were on our way as usual, tired and not much in the mood to talk. My friend always fell asleep while I stayed awake. I have never been able to sleep on public transport. I suppose it's the state of alertness that keeps me awake. Anyway, we were on that long stretch of road where we practically go through the woods on a dirt road that we have to travel to get to my village. Usually, in that stretch, the bus goes a bit slower because of the stones and it already bounced a lot. I remember the inside lights were off because the driver already knew us and he asked us if we wanted him to turn off the lights because they are very bright and really sting the eyes, and we all said yes. So, everything outside was visible and it was something that imposed a lot of endless darkness, but something happened. My friend and I were up front. I was sitting in the seat next to the aisle so I could perfectly see the road ahead, and that's what I was doing, watching, when suddenly I saw something very strange crossing the road, traversing it. We all got scared. Even my friend woke up. The driver completely stopped and was silent for a few seconds. "Did someone else see that?" asked the driver, and I was the only one who responded, "Yes, I saw it, but I don't know what it was." The man was very scared, and I was even more so because what little I had managed to see was something very strange that was crawling. It was something on 4 legs, but the hind legs were too long and thin. I didn't know if it was some strange animal roaming around the area, but I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to scare the other people, but I knew that the driver had seen it better than me. That's why he was so scared. Suddenly, a lady who was in one of the back seats screamed that we had to get off. Maybe it was a person who needed help. The driver didn't answer her, He just got up from his seat and opened the bus door. My friend and I got up and followed him, but before getting off, we noticed something dragging itself towards the woods. Something that we couldn't see what it was because of how fast it was. When we got off and looked ahead and under the bus, there was no one. We looked around the bus, but we didn't find anything. At that moment, we heard something moving behind the branches on the side of the road. The driver went for his flashlight and walked towards the woods, and we followed him. And there we saw something that we didn't expect. It was a woman. She had no clothes, and she looked very unkempt and was injured on one arm. We told her that we would help her and asked her if she was okay, but she didn't answer us. She just watched us without any expression, not even of pain or fear. Her look was cold. She had no expression. The driver took out his phone and called emergencies, but upon hearing this, the woman dragged herself in an impressively fast way towards the back of the woods, losing herself among the branches in the darkness. The three of us saw that, shocked. It was too strange. It seemed like an animal by how it dragged itself. It was something so out of the ordinary. My friend told me that he would return to the bus and that I should do the same. It was obvious that he felt fear after witnessing that. But I stayed there with the man who ventured a little more among that endless woods to see if he could locate the woman, but we could no longer find her. However, he left the report to the police, who told him that it would take them half an hour to reach the place. So the man decided that it was better to take us to the village that was less than 20 minutes away, because the ladies who were on the bus were also very scared. We arrived at the village and the bus dropped us off at the stop. The driver returned immediately for when the authorities arrived. That night I went to sleep with many questions, trying to process what I saw, asking myself again and again if it was real. The next day the same driver was driving the bus that would take us to the city, and of course I asked him what had happened after he left us, but unfortunately he had no answers because he said that the police also found nothing, not even traces of any human having been there. They simply left it like that and told him to let it go, that there was nothing to be done. So, I don't have a conclusion for all this. I don't really know who that woman or thing was. I tell you that before seeing her in the woods, I saw a strange figure crossing the road, and I don't know if it was that same woman who, after knowing that we were following her, changed shape. I know it sounds very crazy and far-fetched, but I find no other explanation. The truth is, we never saw her again, nor did I see anything strange on that stretch after that. I really don't know what happened. This is my story. I hope you can give your opinion on my case. I would like to have more opinions. Thank you for listening. My name is Hermelinda and I am from Chiapas, Mexico. I grew up in an indigenous village, but I managed to move to the city to study thanks to a scholarship I won when I was 17 years old. I studied to become a nurse, and now I work and live off this profession. However, back then, when I was very young, about 18 years old, I was already studying nursing, but I took the bus every day from my village to the city where the college is located. It was a very long stretch of road, taking about 2 hours each way. I would take the first bus that left at 5 a.m. in order to arrive on time for my first class at 8 a.m., as I still had to catch another bus to the college once I reached the city. One morning I left my house very early while it was still quite dark, as the sun did not rise until 6:30 a.m. I was walking towards the bus stop, but then remembered that I had forgotten a very important book I needed to take to college, so I decided to run back home to get it. However, when I returned to the stop, I saw that the bus had just left and was already very far away. I had no choice but to sit and wait for the next one, which did not leave until 6 a.m. I knew I would miss my first class, which worried me as I had a scholarship to maintain. I was quite nervous. There was no one else there, as everyone had gone on the first bus. I was sitting alone at that stop in the middle of nowhere, with just wilderness in front of me and, after a while, the road. I was a bit scared to be there alone, but did not want to go back home and risk missing another bus, so I waited. But unexpectedly, another bus approached. It was only 5:30 a.m., which I found very strange since the next one was not due until 6 a.m. However, I did not question it too much, and instead was happy thinking I might still make it to my first class. I stood up waiting for the bus to reach the stop, but when it did, I saw that it was a different bus. It claimed to be going to the city, but it was very old and looked strange. I saw silhouettes inside it moving around and knew there were people inside. Suddenly the door opened. I moved closer, wanting to ask the driver if it was indeed going to the city, as I wanted to be sure. But just as I was about to peek inside, I felt someone pull my arm backwards. I turned around, startled, to see who it was, and it was an elderly woman. She told me in our indigenous language not to get on, to go backwards while she pulled me further away from that bus. Meanwhile, the bus remained there with its door open. I did not understand what was happening, and the woman only said, "Look." And then I saw the bus start to move but disappear within seconds. Not because it was moving away, but because it literally vanished into thin air. I clearly saw it fade as if it were just an illusion. I was very surprised and asked the woman, very scared, what had happened. How could the bus just disappear like that? And she told me that the bus had had an accident many years ago near there. It had overturned with several passengers on board and no one survived. She said that there had been several people who had seen it passing by, even stopping at that stop as if to pick someone up. She told me that once, her neighbor's son was seen getting on, and no one had heard from him since. She warned me not to be alone at that stop, and if I saw it again, to simply walk away from there and under no circumstances get on it. I didn't know what to think at the time. There were many legends in my village and many paranormal stories, but I had never heard that one, nor had I ever witnessed it. I was so frightened that after that, I asked my older sister to accompany me to the stop every day. But I never saw that bus again. This really happened to me, and believe me, one is skeptical until things happen to them, and they experience them firsthand. It's not the only paranormal thing I have lived through, as now as a nurse I have witnessed many paranormal events at the hospital where I work, but I will tell you about those another time. Thank you for listening to these stories. I hope you enjoyed them. Much more content is on the way. Subscribe and activate the little bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Have a great evening, everyone. See you next time.